Karen jolted awake to the sound of chainsaws outside her window. She threw on her robe and burst through the front door, only to stare in horror as her prized oak trees, which had shaded her home for over 2 decades, toppled to the ground. "What on earth is happening?" she screeched, marching toward the landscaping crew. A smug-looking man in a Harda turned to face her. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson. I'm afraid those trees had to go. They were blocking the view for your neighbors." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Blocking the view? These trees have been here since before your precious neighborhood was even built." The man shrugged. "Orders from the HOA. Something about improving property values. I'd suggest keeping your voice down before you upset the other residents." Karen's face flushed with rage. She stormed back into her house, muttering under her breath. This was unacceptable. Those trees were part of her family's legacy, and she'd be damned if some power-hungry HOA was going to take them down without a fight. Asterisk, I'll show them who they're messing with. Asterisk, she thought, pacing back and forth. Asterisk, time to put my strategic planning skills to the test. Asterisk. Karen spent the rest of the morning making phone calls and poring over local bylaws. She discovered that her beloved oak trees were actually federally protected. Any unauthorized removal would be a serious violation. Asterisk, perfect. Asterisk, she thought. A devious grin sprang across her face. Asterisk, now I just need to find the ringleader behind this little HOA cop. Asterisk. Karen marched down to the community center, scanning the room until her eyes landed on a familiar face. Helen, the HOA president. The older woman was chatting animatedly with a group of other residents, no doubt conspiring against her. Stealing her nerves, Karen approached the group. "Helen, I need to have a word with you." "Privately." Helen looked annoyed, but nodded, leading Karen to a secluded corner of the room. "What is it, Karen?" "I'm in the middle of an important meeting." "I think you know exactly what this is about," Karen said, her voice low and menacing. "Those oak trees in my yard were federally protected. Do you have any idea how much trouble you and your little HOA cronies are in?" Helen's eyes widened for a moment before she schooled her features into a mask of nonchalance. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Karen. The HOA was simply following proper procedures to improve the neighborhood's aesthetic." "Proper procedures, my ass." Karen spat. "You're going to undo this, and you're going to do it quickly before I take this all the way to the top." Helen's lips thinned into a tight line. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The decision has been made, and the trees have already been removed. There's nothing more to discuss." With that, Helen turned on her heel and marched back to the group, leaving a seething Karen in her wake. Asterisk, oh, this is far from over. Asterisk, Karen thought, her mind already whirring with a new plan of attack. Fuming, Karen stormed out of the community center and headed straight for her neighbor's house. If the HOA thought they could bully her without consequences, they had another thing coming. She pounded on the door until a bewildered-looking elderly woman answered. "Mrs. Perkins, I need your help." The woman blinked in surprise. "Why, Karen? What on earth is the matter?" "The HOA has just had my oak trees cut down, despite the fact that they're federally protected." Karen spat. "I need you to join me in filing a formal complaint. This is an outrage." Mrs. Perkins' eyes widened, and she quickly ushered Karen inside. "Oh my goodness, that's simply unacceptable. Of course, I'll help however I can." Over the next hour, Karen rallied several of her other neighbors, each one as outraged as the last. They pored over the HOA's bylaws, searching for any loopholes or infractions they could use to their advantage. "We need to hit them where it hurts. Their wallets," one neighbor, a retired lawyer, suggested. "The fines for removing federally protected trees can be astronomical." Karen nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do. Are you all with me?" A chorus of enthusiastic yeas filled the room, and Karen felt a surge of hope. She may have been outmatched by the HOA's resources, but with her neighbor's support, she just might have a fighting chance. Asterisk, watch out, Helen. Asterisk, she thought, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Asterisk, you've picked a fight with the wrong woman. Asterisk. Over the next few days, Karen and her newly formed tree brigade worked tirelessly to build their case against the HOA. They meticulously documented every step of the illegal tree removal, gathering evidence and preparing a comprehensive legal strategy. We need to show that the HOA violated federal regulations, as well as their own bylaws, the retired lawyer, Mr. Johnson, explained during one of their strategy sessions. That will give us the strongest grounds for a lawsuit and hefty fines. Karen nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. And what about the actual replanting of the trees? How do we ensure they follow through? We'll demand that as part of the settlement, Mr. Johnson replied. Plus, we'll need to get the city arborist involved to oversee the process and ensure the trees are properly cared for. The group spent hours poring over documents, making phone calls, and preparing their arguments. Karen felt a growing sense of confidence. This time, the HOA wouldn't be able to steamroll over her so easily. As the days passed, the neighborhood buzz about the tree fiasco grew louder. Residents who had previously been indifferent or even supportive of the HOA's actions now began to question the organization's motives and tactics. Good. Karen thought. The more public attention we can bring to this, the better. Finally, the day of the big meeting arrived. Karen and her neighbors filed into the community center, their expressions resolute. This was war, and they were ready to fight. The air in the community center was thick with tension as Karen and her neighbors took their seats, facing off against the smug-looking members of the HOA board. Helen, the HOA president, stood at the front of the room, a forced smile plastered on her face. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I understand there has been some concern over the recent tree removal in our neighborhood. However, I can assure you that the HOA acted in accordance with our bylaws and... That's a lie, and you know it. Karen interrupted, rising from her seat. Those trees were federally protected, and you had no right to cut them down. The room erupted in murmurs and shouts of agreement as Karen's neighbors voiced their support. Helen's smile faltered, and she held up a hand, silencing the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, I understand your frustration, but the decision was made to improve the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood. Surely you can appreciate. Karen scoffed. You've destroyed a piece of my family's history, and you think I'm going to appreciate it. Not a chance in hell. Mr. Johnson stood up, his expression serious. The HOA has clearly violated federal regulations, as well as its own bylaws, in the removal of these trees. We have ample evidence to support a lawsuit, and we intend to pursue it to the fullest extent of the law. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Helen's face paled. She frantically glanced around the room, her composure beginning to crumble. This is outrageous, she sputtered. The HOA has the authority to make such decisions, and we stand by our actions. There's nothing you can do about it. Karen leaned forward, a malicious grin spreading across her face. Oh, I think you'll find that we can do quite a lot. And trust me, Helen, you're about to learn the hard way that you shouldn't have messed with this neighborhood. The meeting descended into chaos as the two sides traded barbs and accusations, neither willing to back down. Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. The battle had only just begun, and she was more determined than ever to take the HOA down. In the days following the contentious HOA meeting, Karen and her neighbors wasted no time in taking legal action. They filed a formal complaint with the local authorities, citing the illegal tree removal and the HOA's disregard for federal regulations. The response was swift and decisive. The city arborist quickly stepped in, issuing a cease and desist order and slapping the HOA with hefty fines for the unauthorized tree removal. Karen and her allies were elated. It seemed like their hard work was paying off. However, the HOA was not about to go down without a fight. Helen, the HOA president, began rallying the other members, painting Karen and her neighbors as troublemakers who were disrupting the peace and harmony of the community. They're trying to undermine the authority of the HOA, Helen declared during a special meeting. If we let them get away with this, who knows what other rules they'll try to break next. The HOA members, many of whom were longtime residents, were swayed by Helen's impassioned pleas. They began to turn against Karen and her group, sending anonymous threats and harassment through social media and even vandalizing the homes of the more vocal protesters. Karen and her allies were undeterred, though. They continued to push forward with their legal case, determined to hold the HOA accountable for their actions. The city arborist, impressed by their tenacity, even offered to provide expert testimony in support of their claims. As the battle lines were drawn, the neighborhood became increasingly divided. Neighbors who had once been friends now found themselves on opposing sides, with the HOA supporters and Karen's allies engaging in heated arguments and confrontations. It was a tense and ugly situation, but Karen refused to back down. She knew that the stakes were high, and she was more determined than ever to protect the legacy of her beloved oak trees. Asterisk, this is far from over, asterisk, she thought, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the chaos unfolding around her. Asterisk, you'll fight them every step of the way, asterisk. The legal battle between Karen's group and the HOA dragged on for months, with both sides entrenching themselves deeper and deeper into their respective positions. The courtroom proceedings were fierce and contentious, with both sides presenting mountains of evidence and calling in expert witnesses. Throughout it all, Karen remained steadfast, pouring her heart and soul into the fight. She spent countless hours poring over legal documents, coordinating with her neighbors, and attending every court hearing. The strain began to show, however, as the legal costs started to pile up. Here, Mr. Johnson, the retired lawyer, admitted during one of their strategy meetings. The HOA has deep pockets, and they're not afraid to use them to drag this out as long as possible. Karen's face fell, but she refused to give in. We can't back down now, not after everything we put into this. Those trees meant the world to me, and I'll be damned if I let the HOA win. Reluctantly, the group agreed to continue the legal battle, but they knew that their resources were dwindling. They started to reach out to the wider community, seeking donations and support from those who sympathized with their cause. The tactic worked, to an extent. Slowly but surely, the group was able to raise enough funds to keep the case going, but the strain was taking its toll, both financially and emotionally. Finally, after nearly a year of drawn-out proceedings, the judge delivered his ruling. The HOA was found guilty of violating federal tree protection laws, and they were ordered to pay hefty fines and replant the trees at their own expense. Karen and her neighbors erupted in cheers, elated by the victory, but as the adrenaline wore off, the reality of their situation set in. They had won the battle, but at a tremendous cost. We did it, Karen said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. But I don't know how much more of this I can take. The group fell silent, the weight of their sacrifice hanging heavy in the air. They had fought hard, and they had won, but the true cost of their victory was yet to be fully realized. In the wake of their hard-fought legal victory, Karen and her neighbors found themselves facing a new set of challenges. The fines and legal fees had taken a significant toll on their personal finances, leaving many of them struggling to make ends meet. As the HOA begrudgingly set about replanting the federally protected oak trees, Karen watched with a mixture of relief and sadness. The once majestic trees that had graced her property for decades were gone, replaced by small saplings that would take years to grow to their former glory. It's not the same, she lamented to her closest allies. Those trees were part of my family's history, and now they're just gone. The other neighbors nodded in sullen agreement, their own sense of loss palpable. They had won the battle, but at what cost? Despite their triumph, the lingering impact of the ordeal had taken a toll on the community. Friendships had been strained, and the once tight-knit neighborhood had become fractured and divided. Karen found herself withdrawing from the very people she had fought so hard to defend. The emotional and financial strain had left her weary and disillusioned, and she struggled to find the energy to continue the fight. As the new trees were planted and the HOA's fines were paid, Karen realized that her victory had come at a heavy price. She had protected the legacy of her beloved oak trees, but in the process, she had lost something much more precious, the sense of community and belonging that had once defined her neighborhood. With a heavy heart, Karen turned her gaze toward the future, uncertain of what it held. The battle with the HOA may have been won, but the scars it had left behind would take time to heal. Asterisk, perhaps some battles are best left unfought. Asterisk, she mused, her eyes lingering on the young saplings that now graced her yard. Asterisk, sometimes, the cost of victory is simply to buy asterisk.